Hello, food forest gardeners, and welcome back to our backyard food forest. Nick here again, and this is an ant mound. Take a look, you can see the little ants all crawling around in there. We've got some freshly mowed trails today in the food forest, so it's a good time to look at the ant mounds and talk about ants a little bit. Here's another. That's a big ant hole right there. Bunch of little ants working, little soldiers working. So here in Central Florida with our sandy soils, it turns out that ants are actually a lot better than earthworms for building your soil. Earthworms are good for annual garden beds, but ants are better for food forest ecosystems, especially in sand, and especially in climates that are pretty dry. And yes, we're in the rainy season right now in Florida, but that only lasts about 3 to 4 months. The rest of the year, 8 to 9 months, it's darn dry. It's actually considered to be a xeric environment. So you have more evaporation than rainfall. And with the sandy soils draining like they do, it makes it pretty hard on plants. So it's more of a desert-like environment. There's a spot with some ants cruising around. Yeah, I hate to be stung by ants. You know, it hurts. But I've come to realize that they're my friend, really, if I want to grow an actual food forest ecosystem with long-term perennial plants. And that's what I'm more focused on than the annual vegetable garden beds. I find this long-term strategy, it works better. It's less work. Once it gets going, it's off and running, and you just have food that comes, and you don't really have to work much for it anymore. I did most of my work here in this food forest last year. There's another one. There's a hole there. Little ants running in and out. And so, you know, you can get close to them like I'm doing here. I don't have any on me. I don't have any of them biting me. You get bit when you sort of lose track of what you're doing, and you stand in right on their bed for a while without knowing it. It happens to the best of us. I got stung yesterday. As a matter of fact, actually not stung, really. You just get bit. And when you get bit, that formic acid gets injected into you, which has a pH of around 2. Okay, and that's painful. A pH of 2, remember pH is logarithmic, so a pH of 2 is 1,000 times more acidic than a pH of 5. And a pH of 5 is pretty darn acidic. So ants are amazing. They build your soil, and they basically create little compost piles down inside the ant hill. Or we don't really see the hills as much. I mean, they do pile up the sand grains, but most of what they're doing is below ground, not up in a hill. There's another one. Look, these ants are unusually active right now because I just came through here with my little electric push mower and mowed these trails. So I disturbed them a little bit. Not enough to make them leave. You know, I used to do so-called non-toxic ant treatments. You know, if you look it up, you can find one that uses aerobic compost tea mixed with molasses. And I found that I would drench the ant mounds with that, and it would definitely, if not kill them, it would make them move. So it would address the situation, and it would make the ants go away and go somewhere else. But, you know, I've reached the point where I don't even do that anymore. I think if I'm just acting more mindfully, in other words, I'm just trying to be aware of where the ants are. Anytime I stop moving, I take a look. Where have I stopped? What am I standing on? And I don't do it every time. Sometimes I forget, and every once in a while I pay the price and I get bit. But yeah, they move insect parts and seeds little bits of plant matter, and they move their own feces into little chambers down in their ant bed. And these are little compost piles. And you've got really highly concentrated plant nutrients in there. Not just your N, P, and K, but also all your other micronutrients, everything that plants need. It's highly concentrated in these little ant compost beds, if you will. The ants actually, obviously the ants live in a world dominated by microbes, right? And the only way they're able to do that without getting infected by bacteria and the microbes is by maintaining their own body chemistry very, very low. So they're made up largely of formic acid. Their body pH is down there around 2 to 3. And that's what keeps them from getting infected by the bacteria and stuff. Now, it's important to know that they don't actually acidify your soil. The overall effect of what they do is basically they're just a buffer, a pH buffer. This one, I don't see any activity. It might be an old one. So the ants may have moved on from this spot right here, but that means they probably left behind a little compost pile down there. So yeah, those nutrients, here's a good one right here. Those nutrients that they leave or that they store in their little compost beds, that's a good hot spot for nutrients for the mycorrhizal fungi. So just as in any compost pile, you're going to have decomposing type fungi working on that, breaking it down. But then you'll also have the mycelium, the fungal hyphae of the mycorrhizal fungi. That's going to get down into there and grab those nutrients and then move those throughout your food forest, as we've talked about many times on this channel. The mycorrhizal fungi are the masters of this environment. They're the conductor of the symphony, and they move those nutrients and water, other organic compounds that have to do with immunity, immune response. They move all that stuff around the food forest, and to work in their best interest, that just means to make the food forest as big and robust and productive as quickly as possible so that the ground is shaded and more moist, because they can't live in a dry environment, too dry. But ants are better than earthworms in sandy soil and in more of a food forest type environment. Earthworms prefer a clay soil. Obviously, they like lots of organic matter, and they really thrive in clay and organic matter. That's more of a closer to a neutral pH, 6.5 to 7 on the pH. Whereas out here in Florida in these sandy soils, in a more forest type environment, forests prefer a fungally dominated soil, not bacteria and earthworms. And a fungally dominated soil is a lower pH. And this is where ants, especially if it's really sandy and pretty dry much of the year. And remember, even during the rainy season, because it is sandy, the water drains quickly. There's another one. And so even during the rainy season, a sandy soil is not going to be necessarily all that wet because it drains so quickly. And we get the hot sun comes back out, and within a couple of days, everything's pretty hot and dry again. This is a perfect environment for ants. So yeah, I've learned to live with the ants. They help me. And so whenever I get bit by an ant and I feel that painful bite, what I try to do is allow it to remind me to live mindfully. Watch where I step. Don't mess with them. Oh yeah, I was going to mention, back when I was using this aerobic compost tea based solution to try to get the ants to go away, I don't even know if it was anything in that. It could have just been the fact that I drenched their mound with water. If you put a garden hose on an ant mound and just let that water run long enough, it'll basically get so wet and they won't like it and they'll move. They'll go somewhere else. So you can deter ants just with water. So I don't know if the compost tea molasses combination is what did it, or just the fact that I was dousing them with 2 or 3 gallons of water that happened to have, you know, compost tea and molasses in it. But you don't have to use chemicals on ants. You really don't. You really shouldn't. Those chemicals are toxic, not just to the ants. You'd be surprised at how much ants actually help improve your soil, and help and work with the mycorrhizal fungi to move the nutrients around the food forest. So this little food forest has definitely gotten off to a great start. We've got a lot of insects and bugs of all different kinds, and butterflies and bees and birds, lizards, frogs. Occasionally big critters come in here like turkeys, sandhill cranes. And we definitely have a lot of ants, and that's fine with me. They don't bother me. And if I get stung or bit, I keep saying stung. If I get bit by an ant, well, that's on me probably. I probably should have been more cognizant of where I was, what I was doing, living more mindfully. So these were just the ants that we found along the trails here. Who knows how many ant beds there are back in all this lush ground. If you look at all this, it's quite lush. Let's get off the trail a little bit and just see what we've got. See, there's something that looks like an ant mound. That's probably what caused that little pile of sand right there. So they move the larger sand particles up from below ground to create their little chambers and spaces down there. They're very meticulous. You know, they do a lot of housekeeping down there, and they move all the waste, put it in these particular spots. You call it their waste dump. And it's a nice little compost, and it's really highly concentrated with those great nutrients that you need for your food forest. So yeah, love the ants, learn to live with them. Don't use the chemicals. If you really have to move them, try just using some water. Just douse them pretty good with a water hose for a while and let it run for a good hour or two. And I'll bet you anything they'll be gone. You won't have to worry them, but they'll just move to another spot, probably not too far from there. And that's fine. Hopefully that's going to be in a spot where they can live and you can live and everybody can prosper together. All right, just a word or two about ants. They're great for your food forest in Florida. Take care, everybody.